Amen. We are on a journey toward Christmas, and it's a journey that we've been on the last couple of weeks, and part of the journey toward Christmas does involve music, and so you have seen a variety of music in our service today. We'll return to our base format here at the 9:30 next week, but it's important to be reminded of the season and hear the bells and hear the violin and some of those instruments that are a little bit maybe not what we're normally used to, but sure embrace at Christmas time. And so I appreciate all the effort that went into being here for those groups that were here at the 9:30 with us this morning. Well, this Christmas journey that we're on, we started a couple of weeks ago, and we started with the beginning of Christmas. And as we started with the beginning of Christmas, we know that Christmas began actually before Jesus was being born in a manger. In fact, according to the Scriptures, it was in the Garden of Eden after Adam and Eve had sinned, and they had been given punishment by God, that there was a proclamation or a prophecy that one day this offspring of the serpent and the offspring of Mary would be in this battle, and it would seem that if the serpent would defeat almost the offspring of Mary, but that at some point, at some day, that serpent would be struck and crushed. And so we understand that to be a prophecy of the coming of Jesus. So we talked about that 2 weeks ago, and then understanding then that the beginning of Christmas started such a long time ago that we have spent a long time waiting on Christmas. And that's what we talked about last week on some strategies about how we're supposed to wait for Christmas, how we're going to get between now and December the 25th with the presents. But that Christmas waiting was actually a much longer time than that, and we examined how some people waited for that Christmas, that first Christmas. We looked at Zechariah and Mary and Simeon and everyone else, and we came to the conclusion that while we are waiting for Christmas, not just between now and December the 25th, but the fact that we are waiting for the second coming of Christ, the second coming of that child, now who is a man who will come back, that you and I better be engaged in serving, being around other believers, and that we must stay close to God in all of that connection, lest we will forget that we're waiting. And we did a beautiful job of that last week as a congregation with a totally Christmas bash and how you responded to that and all the people. In fact, we had 28 people last week pray to receive Christ to be their personal Lord and Savior, and we have invited all of them back to be here at 2 o'clock today because we're hosting a very special baptism service for them. And we've had several that said they're going to be here, and several said we think we're going to be here, and you know how that goes. So I'd ask you to pray that God would stir the hearts of some people who prayed to receive Him last week to follow that next step with baptism, just like Jesus did. And in fact, if you've never been baptized, but you've trusted Christ as your personal Lord and Savior, we would invite you to come back this afternoon. You'll need to be here just a couple of minutes early. We're going to do that at 2 o'clock. But if you've never done that, we'd love for you to come back today, and we'll talk with you at about 1:45 about how you can be baptized and what that means. So we're talking about waiting on Christmas last week. Well, today what we're going to do is kind of move forward from waiting on Christmas and begin to answer and discuss the question of what is the Christmas journey and what does it mean to celebrate Christmas. What's going on at Christmas? Is it more than just some lights? Is it more than just some tinsel on the tree? Is it more than just the baby born in a manger? And we're going to look in the Scriptures to get our answers for that. In fact, we're going to start in the book of Micah, and I want to go ahead and tell you that because it may take you a couple of minutes to find the book of Micah, because it may not be one of those that you'll look for. And while you're looking it up, don't get Malachi confused with Micah. Okay, those are two different books, so you might want to get those confused. That happens to Daniel's family all the time, doesn't have Micah, Malachi get confused. But we're talking about Micah because Micah is a prophet from the 700s, really the 8th century BC, and he was ministering during the same time of Isaiah, Amos, and Hosea. All those guys were ministering at the same time, and a prophet's job is to make a message, and the message is this, typically for the prophet: hey, you're doing the wrong thing. God is going to punish you for that, but after He punishes you, He's going to come back because He's got a blessing on you even though you've messed up. That's really what a prophet's job is. And so they come in and they warn the people, then they defend God's actions, and then they bring hope. Well, Micah, particularly in Micah chapter 5, begins to talk about this coming of the Messiah. And this is the passage that when the Magi come, looking for the newborn king with the star in the sky, it is this passage that the priests, the prophets of those days, look up to determine where Jesus is being born. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to do a little investigative work because we're going to kind of look at the setting of the birth of Christ to see if we can learn something about God so that we might better understand what Christmas is, so that we might better respond. So we're going to be a little investigative journey here. We're going to kind of look at a few things and try to make some observations on what the Scriptures teach us. Now, Micah chapter 5 is where they quoted in the book of Luke in the first part, Matthew, and here's where it says. It says, "Marshal your troops now, city of troops, for a siege is laid against us." Now, Micah's talking in a historical specific time. It's the 720s, and there's a group of Assyrians who are attacking all the people of God. In fact, at this time, the people of God are divided into really two groups. There's the kind of the northern groups and the southern groups. There were 12 tribes, and most of the tribes were northern troops, some were tribes. Then there was a couple that ended up being the southern tribes. Sometimes that's referred to as Judah, that bottom two tribes. And then the 10 northern tribes, sometimes referred to Israel or Samaria. In just a few years, because of the northern tribes' disobedience to God, the Assyrians are going to come in and destroy all of them. And what Micah's trying to do is trying to not only warn them if that's going to happen, warn all of Israel and Judah, but also to let them know that even though they're coming, the Assyrians are going to come and destroy your way of life, God is going to come in some point and redeem all of that. So here's what he's saying. "Marshal your troops now, for a siege is laid against us," the Assyrians. "They will strike Israel's ruler on the cheek with a rod. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah," and this is the passage that's quoted in the New Testament when the Magi ask, "But to you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah," I want you to notice something. How does he describe Bethlehem? Small out of the clans of Judah. "Out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over all of Israel," not just northern tribes and southern tribes, but all the tribes, "whose origins are from old, from ancient of times. Therefore, all of Israel will be abandoned until the time," meaning that you're going to lose this battle, "and you're going to be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor bears a son, and the rest of the brothers return to join the Israelites." We think that that is prophecy that is yet to happen. So Micah's talking about the time that was going to happen in Jesus' time and then the time beyond that. But here's what he goes on to say. "He," meaning that one that's going to come, "will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of his God his Lord, and they will live securely, for then his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth." There's a prophecy, a proclamation that there's going to be born. Bethlehem, you're a small little tribe. You're not that important. We're about to be destroyed by all of these enemies, but there is coming a day that out of you, out of your lineage, out of your place is going to rise another king who is going to be more powerful and stronger than the Assyrians who come to destroy us. In fact, that king is going to be stronger than any earthly kingdom, because this guy will stand up and everybody will live securely, and his greatness is going to reach to the ends of what? The entire earth. Now, have you noticed something about that? I want you to pretend for just a few moments that you are God. Now, I know some of you do that most of the time, so please don't do that part of it. I'm just talking about while we're here in just a moment. And I want you to plan a strategy that if you were going to send your son into the world, how would you send him into the world? Here's what God chose to do. God chose to choose a backwater country bumpkin location of Bethlehem to put his son there. Bethlehem is one of those places that you are glad you are from. You know what I'm talking about? Anybody grew up in a little small town and you were glad that you are from there and you are not there now? Anybody like that? That's kind of the hometown that I grew up from. It's Malvern, Arkansas, a great little town to be from. Not such a great place to live today or to be, but it was a great place to come from. Well, Bethlehem was on that line. But you can learn just as much about God as what he does as what he doesn't do. Let me say that again. Oftentimes, you can learn just as much about God by what he doesn't do as to what he does. In fact, think about all the places that he could have been born. If I am God, I'm not going to let my child be born who comes in the world in a little backwoods, small town Bethlehem. I'm going to put him in a powerful location. At this time, the center of the world, the capital location for the world would have been Rome. It would be a combination of New York City with its financial power and Washington, D.C. with its political power, because that is where much of the rule and decisions for all of the world were made. But God did not put his son to be born in that capital city. Neither did God have his son to be born in the religious capital of the world, which would have been Jerusalem. You know from your little studies, or your great studies of the Jewish people, that Jerusalem was kind of important to the Jews. Do you know that? This is yes, this is no. But Jerusalem was kind of important to the Jews, and by the way, anything that happens in Jerusalem, you and I know about within a few minutes, even today. In fact, we are called to know what's going on in Jerusalem. You and I are called to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Now, I want you to notice that about God, though. When he comes, he doesn't put his son in the political power location, doesn't put him with a resume of, hey, I've got this great background of growing up in Jerusalem and all those kind of things, but he is born in a backwater location. How many of you are born in a backwater location? Would you raise your hand? And see, look how far you've come. See, look how far you've come. You've made it to Branson of all the places, and so maybe it'll get better. But think about God. That's where he chooses to put his son. And you know the rest of the story, the rest of the setting, the rest of the context, right? I mean, if you go to the book of Luke, you know more about the story. It says, while they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. You know the setup, right? Mary and Joseph going to have this kid. But the government gets involved because they declare that it's time to tax everybody. Aren't you glad things have changed so much? That we're going to tax everybody, but we need to know who is who, so everybody's got to go back to their ancestral home. Everybody's got to go back to where they were from, and guess where Joseph was from? Sorry, did it stop here? Guess where Joseph was from? Guess where his family was from? Bethlehem. Y'all doing about Christmas, right? You've had somebody read the Christmas story to you? You're just like blank there for a second. I don't know where Joseph was from. Was I supposed to be listening at this point? I don't know. Pittsburgh. I don't know where he was from. No, his family was from the city of David, Bethlehem. So he's got to pack up his wife, who happens to be great with child. Men, can you imagine taking a couple of day journey on a donkey with your wife when she's pregnant? Can you imagine how much fun that was for Joseph? I mean, we feel sorry for Mary, but feel sorry for, well, never mind. They're going to have to stop every 10 minutes to find a restroom from that donkey to get that wife back there because she's, I don't know, you think about that. So there they are. And so when the time came for the baby to be born, she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. Now, you and I know this story so well, we don't even see how shocking that is. Because you think about a little baby, most of the time, little babies can't really protect themselves, can they? Most of the time, little babies can't get up and get their own food. In fact, you and I, when we hear of the abuse of a child or of a baby, our blood begins to boil because they are so defenseless. And yet when God sent his son, he sent him as a baby. And I'm not sure that's what I would have done. You know, if I'm God and I send my son to the earth, he's going to be a full-grown man. He's probably 6'8", 325 pounds, chiseled kind of like I am, to take care of anything that goes on in this world. Camille, that's not funny. I can hear you. But am I going to risk it all? Am I going to risk my son in a little tiny package of a little tiny baby who can't even burp himself? And yet that's what God did. Didn't send him as a full-grown man, not as an adult. I think part of that is so God understands you teenagers and what you're going through, because God has been there. But he didn't come as an adult, he came as a baby. Then we know the rest of the story, Luke chapter 2. She wrapped him in cloth and she placed him in a manger. You know what a manger is, people? It is a feed trough. How many of you are germaphobes? Yeah. Can you imagine taking your brand new little baby? Before you had the little wipes that you could wipe, you know, the little handles at Walmart, you wipe that kind of stuff. But before you had the little tube of whatever stuff that you put in your hands, you know, that alcohol-based kind of thing. Before any of that, the Son of God is put in a manger, which we make a little cute little thing, you know, up here, a little straw, and how cute it is, that kind of stuff. Probably made of stone, probably carved out of stone, and probably a place that donkeys and cows and all these other are slobbering on as they're getting their food. And you're going to take your baby and you're going to put him there. Not a cradle, not a cute little bassinet with the little, you know, the little cute little mobile with the little bears or whatever. They're smiling at him, playing the little music going around and around. None of that kind of stuff. We're talking about that God himself allowed his son to be put in a place where the cows or the donkeys or whatever animals got together and they slobbered all over, and that's where you put the Son of God. And then it kind of gets even stranger than that. The Scriptures goes on to say that they placed him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. Now, there's some debate as to what this inn was. This was probably not the Holiday Inn. In fact, it was probably not a place that people would be entertained in like we would think of a hotel. Sometimes we call this a stable. But that is a different word than is used right there for an inn. In fact, the word here used for inn is probably closer to a guest room than it is a hotel like we kind of think of it is. But none matter, whatever that really is, we know that there were probably animals that were there. That probably this is the way that it went. Probably it was that Joseph goes to a family member's house, but because of all the other family members are there, that it's full. It probably wasn't that he goes to the Holiday Inn, they lost his reservation, and they let him stay in the parking garage. That's kind of the way that we think of it, but that's probably not the way that it happened. The words are different. You know, when Jesus talks about the Good Samaritan story, the story of the Good Samaritan, the word for where he takes the plate, takes the guy to an inn, that's a different Greek word than this word. Probably what this was, and in those times, most people had a two-story kind of house. It wasn't like the house that we live in, but oftentimes the people would live on the second story of that house to get better breezes because they didn't have air conditioning, they couldn't stay warm, all that kind of stuff. So they kind of lived on the second level, but their animals were so important to them that they didn't want their animals stolen, so oftentimes they would let them stay in the bottom part of the house, kind of lock up the animals. Now, wouldn't that sound fun, right? You know, you go into your basement and there, you know, you got your donkey and you got your cow and you got your chickens and all that kind of stuff. Probably a really nice idea. If the economy goes away, maybe all of us will return to that kind of strategy downstairs. But that's probably what it was, that Jesus and Mary had that child there, so it's kind of good news for the innkeeper because we've been always bad about the innkeeper who didn't let Jesus in. But whether or not it was an inn or not, here is something that no one can claim. No one can say that Jesus stayed here. I love my friend Brian Smith. I'm going to point Brian out. Brian is a great guy, does a great business, does a wonderful job, and he owns a hotel, and just a few months ago, when the undercover boss guy came to stay, Silver City stayed in Brian's place. It's a great location. And Brian did what every smart businessman should do, and that's put a sign out there saying, hey, undercover boss stayed here. You need to come stay here too. That's a good strategy move. Jesus, though, is not for sale. And nobody can say, hey, look, Jesus stayed here. You ever been like in the northeast part of our country and every place you go, George Washington stayed here? Kind of thing? Jesus said, I'll have none of that. No one can claim that I was born there. In fact, his family would probably a little be embarrassed that, yeah, Jesus was born here downstairs with all the animals because we didn't make room for him. Probably not a good marketing strategy if you're in the hospitality business, is it? But he wasn't born in an inn, and he wasn't born in a palace. This God, when he came as son, instead of putting his son in a palace, because he is a king, by the way, you know that this is a king. Instead of being born in a palace, he's born in some kind of place where the animals are, whether it's a stable, whether it's a cave, whether it's a parking garage, whether it's downstairs, whatever it is, he is sharing his space with animals who may or may not have had their shots. It's Christmas, and everywhere we look, people are trying to get our money. You know that, right? Everywhere you look, somebody's trying to sell you something. And for the most part, I am very resistant to that because I'm cheap, okay? And so I look at the value of things. It's not good to be in my family because you don't get a whole lot for Christmas, you know, so that's really kind of bad. But I saw something the other day that I just had to have. And I'm not an impulse shopper. I don't buy anything just because I see it. In fact, my family is so sad for them because I will go buy toilet paper and I will stand there 30 minutes trying to figure out which is a better deal, how many sheets versus ply and the cost, and I'll stand there. Very embarrassing to my family. So it is very difficult for me to go out and make a quick decision. But the other day I saw somebody posted this on their Facebook and I said, I have got to have this. And so I went out, made a massive search, and I bought me a Christmas gift. You know what this is, right? Charlie Brown Christmas tree. In fact, I have such supportive people around me that I brought this to my office, sat it down, and my assistant came in, who's a wonderful person normally, and she came in and looked at this and said, well, that looks about like you. I don't know what she meant by that, but I'm not sure it was good. Because you remember the story about Charlie Brown, right? Charlie Brown can't get anything right. Anybody feel like you're Charlie Brown sometimes? Can't get anything right. And so they finally give him something little to do. They put him in charge of the play, and everybody's dancing around like Snoopy, and nobody will listen to his direction. So finally they say, hey, why don't you go buy a tree? And he goes out, buys a tree, brings it back, and it looks just about like this. And everybody begins to make fun of Charlie Brown, dogging him, we would say back in the 1980s. I don't know what you say today. Or macking him. I don't know what's cool, but that's what we would say back in the old days. Some of y'all from the 80s, aren't you? I can hear. Yeah. So yeah, I know what that means. Yeah, I know what he's talking about. And so Charlie Brown makes this, he just gets so frustrated. He says, okay, can anybody tell me the reason for Christmas? What's the purpose and the meaning of Christmas? And then Linus gets up and preaches better than 95% of the televangelists do. And ABC still hadn't caught on yet. Because he reads the scriptures. And then Charlie Brown looks at the tree, puts a smile on his face, goes out, and understands now the meaning of Christmas, because Christmas is for this kind of thing. You see, you and I get so caught up in trying to get everything right at Christmas. We want everything to be perfect. Some of you are so busy trying to get that right gift for the kid who's been begging for that, and so you are traveling country mile after country mile. You've been to Springfield, and you've been to St. Louis, and you've been to Amazon.com, and you're trying to find this gift, or you stand in line, and you get there because you want it to be perfect, only to come to discover in 3 weeks the kid's not even playing with that. Or the kid takes out of the package and plays with the box. Or maybe you've got a mother-in-law that's coming, and you're going to spend all your time trying to get things finally clean, everything worked up, and so you're doing all those kind of things, and she's going to show up and say, And we put so much energy and effort in being pretty, and isn't this pretty? Aren't you glad we have a great people that can do decoration? I'm not against decoration. I'm not against things looking good. But you and I are trying to put on this front that we look like that Christmas tree, which I can't get, and it cut me this morning, so I'm leaving it right over there in the corner of the stage. But we're trying to make our Christmas look like that, when the truth is that most of us look like this. In fact, my assistant was right, because she's always right. That tree does look about like me. And it looks just about like you too. But that's good news, because the Scripture says that God chose the foolish things of this world, 1 Corinthians says, to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before Him. You see, as good as you think you are, as good as you think you've got it, as pretty as a tree as you think you are, in comparison to who God is and His nature, you are a Charlie Brown tree at best. And that's the good news. That Jesus came not for people who got it all together. Not for people who've got it all looking nice and all sweet and happy and pretty. He came for messed up people who are a sorry-looking little Charlie Brown tree. And that's good news for me. And because I know some of you, it's good news for you. And even if I don't know you, it's good news for you. Doesn't matter what you have in your bank account. Doesn't matter what kind of vehicle you drive. You are still a Charlie Brown Christmas tree crying out for somebody to help. And just like in that little cartoon, through the magic of animation, after they steal Snoopy's Christmas decorations, they turned that messed up little sorry-looking Charlie Brown Christmas tree into a beautiful tree. And that's exactly what Jesus wants to do for you. He wants to take His righteousness, His beauty, His perfection, and He wants to cover you in that. So that you won't just look like that, though that's who you are, but that you'll be different. And you'll be everything that you're supposed to be. See, Christianity is not about limiting you. Following Jesus is not about limiting you. It's about making you what you already are if you trust Him. See, everything we want to believe that is true, which the world tells us is not, really is. And this world does matter, and you matter. Even though you're just a sorry old Charlie Brown Christmas tree, He loved enough to send His own Son as a little baby to be put in a feed trough in some backwater country bumpkin location like Bethlehem, so that we could identify ourselves with Him, so that we could trust Him, so that we could believe in Him.